Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over Hurricane Elsa, which is currently just south of the Dominican Republic. It'll be making its way through Haiti, Cuba, and then eventually into parts of the eastern United States. And we're going to be talking about the track of this storm as well as the intensity of the storm in today's video. This could potentially become a high-end Category 1 or maybe even a low Category 2. So we're going to be talking about that and how that could happen, and also what could prevent that from happening. So we have a lot to get to in today's video, so make sure you are staying tuned all the way until the end. Taking a look at the current National Weather Service page, as you can see, we have some red flag warnings for fire danger in parts of the northwest and the northern plains. We have some excessive heat warnings in parts of Oregon, Idaho, and Montana, as well as some heat advisories in the orange, which is just scattered throughout the western United States as a whole. Other than that, we don't have many other watches or warnings except for some flood watches in southern New Mexico. But other than that, we don't have many other watches or warnings currently in place. Yesterday, we had a high temperature in Death Valley, California of 119 degrees with a low temperature in Peter Sinks, Utah, where they got down to just 30 degrees Fahrenheit. The highest rainfall report was in Kings Creek Township, North Carolina, where they got 5.81 inches of rain. And we did not have any snowfall reports yesterday. So taking a look at the 5-day outlook, you can see that the only storm that we're monitoring right now is Elsa, which is again just south of the Dominican Republic. It's about to move into the southern peninsula of Haiti, and then eventually it'll be moving into Cuba. I think once it moves over Cuba, we're going to have a good idea of what may happen, because Cuba is going to be really the defining aspect of the storm. How much does this get broken apart by the higher terrain is going to be a big question that we need to answer in order to figure out where exactly this will track. So taking a look at Hurricane Elsa on the surface plot, you can see that currently it is a Category 1 storm. It's located at 16.5 degrees north by 70.3 degrees west, maximum winds of 75 miles per hour with minimum pressure of 998 millibars, moving at west-northwest about 31 miles per hour. So you can see it is moving at a rather fast clip, so definitely this is not going to be one of those storms that just sits over one area for 3 or 4 days and just kind of floods one entire area. It's going to be a very fast moving storm. Yesterday, it hadn't even made impact or landfall with Barbados yet, and now we're already talking about this on the other side of the Windward Islands all the way into the Central Caribbean. So we're already moving at a very, very fast pace for this storm, and that's going to help this storm to have some more limited impacts. If this was moving at a slower pace, it would be able to gain a lot more strength, and it would also have a lot more flooding implications. But luckily, this is moving fast enough, and it is small enough of a storm that it won't have some of those big flooding concerns along with it. Taking a look at the satellite imagery, you can see it is fairly well developed. Now, you would think that the core of the storm would be somewhere in here just based on the satellite imagery, but when you actually look at the low-level satellite imagery, the surface low pressure is actually all the way up here. So it is a little bit disconnected from the storm because we do have a little bit of wind shear within this storm, so we don't have a completely stacked storm as of right now. That is helping to weaken the storm quite considerably, but most of the thunderstorm activity is, of course, located to the south and east. The strongest winds, however, are being spotted on the western end of this, and we're going to talk about that when we look at the aircraft recon that went through and is currently going through this morning. Taking a look at the key messages now, I'm not going to read them out for you guys, but if you want to, you can pause the video right here and read them. They're mainly talking about potentially some flooding in these areas, and also where storm surge and wind risks are possible along the track of the storm. So again, you can pause it right here if you are interested in reading the key messages from the National Hurricane Center. here is the current watches and warnings from this storm in the Caribbean. You can see that we have hurricane watches along eastern Cuba. So we already have some of those hurricane watches in that pink color. In the red for all of Jamaica and also for the southern parts of the southern parts of Hispaniola, we have some hurricane warnings in effect, and that's in that red shade. And then along the blue area, that's where we have tropical storm warnings. So that's on the western and eastern coasts of Hispaniola, and then on the northern part of the Dominican Republic, we have some tropical storm watches currently in place. So you can see we already have a ton of watches and warnings currently in place, and you can see really where the National Hurricane Center is expecting the greatest impacts is it's probably going to be where they have those hurricane watches and warnings already in place. Taking a look at the forecasted track of the storm, you can see that it is expected to stay as a hurricane at least until Sunday. So sometime between Sunday morning and afternoon, it should weaken down into a tropical storm, according to the National Hurricane Center, moves along Cuba and then potentially moves into the west coast of Florida, comes out through the southeast, and then we could potentially see a few more impacts along the mid-Atlantic from this storm. But again, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in today's video. One thing that I do want to point out is that this is the cone that the National Hurricane Center is putting out, but again, there is definitely a few possibilities where this could move further north of the cone, or this could also move a little bit south of the cone. These are both possibilities. The National Hurricane Center is just kind of winding it down to these the most likely outcomes, although again, there could definitely be a track outside of this cone that's not being represented on this map. So just because you're not in this cone necessarily, if you're near the cone, you still want to kind of watch out for this because it could still have some impacts in your area. Taking a look at the model guidance, this is one of the reasons that I just pointed that out. If you look at the National Hurricane Center cone, it would only include most of these models right in here, but we're looking at this and we have 4 or 5 models that are outside of that cone. So again, we still have possibility for this to potentially move wide east of the East Coast, which would definitely be a good outcome because it wouldn't impact many big cities. And also we have another less fortunate outcome where it could go into the Gulf of Mexico, which we'll hope doesn't happen, because if that were to happen, we would definitely have a stronger storm that would be able to strengthen in the Gulf of Mexico. So right now the consensus, however, is that this is going to make impact with southwestern Florida, then move into the coastal Carolinas, and then move out into parts of into the coastal waters of the Northeast. So that's generally what we're expecting by this point. If we look at a couple other models, including some of these major models like the GFS and the Canadian model, which are plotted on this map, you can see that they are taking a little bit further of an eastward track. So you can see all of them have them making a fairly close track to Florida, then move through the coastal Carolinas, and then eventually to the northeast coast, and then into parts of southeastern Canada. So that's the general consensus track as of right now. If we look at the GFS ensemble models, these are kind of all over the place as well, but these are further west. So you can see that they're more centered along the Gulf Coast. They're making more landfall with parts of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana than they are with the East Coast, which is something different than what we've been seeing with the other models. So again, there's still discrepancy. I would say it's most likely that something similar to what the National Hurricane Center cone track is probably what's going to happen. But again, we still have a few outcomes that are outside of that cone, and that could definitely still happen. Take a look at the intensity guidance, and you can see that we are currently at a weak category 1. It is expected to become a tropical storm very soon, so to weaken down into a tropical storm, and then I wouldn't rule it out. This is possible that it does go back up to category 1 status. This tropical storm weakening matches up perfectly with when it's expected to go over eastern Cuba, and the reason that's going to happen is because in eastern Cuba we have some high terrain and high elevation. It's perfect perfect for ripping apart some of these smaller storms like Hurricane Elsa. So as it moves into that area, it should weaken down into a 50 knot tropical storm or thereabout, and then potentially as it goes on the other side of Cuba, the flatter side, and then also into the Florida Straits, it could intensify once again, maybe into a low end category 1, and then who knows what happens with the intensity after it passes through Florida. It could, of course, intensify once again after that happens. So again, we still have many questions, and I think, again, probably in another day or two, once it gets over Cuba, that's when we're going to have the best idea of what may happen, because Cuba has been the one area that could kind of make or break the forecast here. If there isn't a lot of intensification after that, then of course we're looking at a weak storm. But if it doesn't even weaken at all going over Cuba, if it kind of misses the island chain overall, then we're talking about a completely different storm. So I think what happens near and around the islands of Cuba is going to be really, really important to the development of this storm, mainly because of that higher terrain, which could break this storm apart. Taking a look at these sea surface temperatures, you can see that these are all warm enough, especially for areas just south of the Caribbean islands. So we're dealing with sea surface temperatures that are near 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So definitely warm enough to support some storms. And if you're looking at the OHC or ocean heat content, these are definitely high enough values. We're dealing with maxed out values just to the south of these Caribbean islands, which is basically right where Elsa is taking the track. So we're looking at Elsa making a track somewhat like this. So it is going right over that kind of jackpot zone in terms of the OHC and the amount of available energy in the waters. So that's definitely not a good sign. So that could definitely help out with development just a little bit. Although I think, again, the mountainous terrain should help tear that apart quite a bit. Taking a look at the upper air setup, the reason that this storm is going to be taking this track is all because of this high pressure. We have your main high pressure up here. We have a little finger which is coming out right here. So that should help the storm kind of slow down a little bit before it moves into Florida. It's going to be moving around this high pressure, which is moving like this. So, of course, the storm, which is Elsa, which is right down here, is going to move kind of right to the west of there. And wherever this high pressure sets up is going to be the kind of where the storm is also going to go. So if this sets up maybe a couple hundred miles further to the west, then we're going to be dealing with a track that's going to look somewhat more like this. If it sets up more to the east, then we're looking at a track more like this. So again, there are still many different possibilities, and there are many different factors, including the upper air setup, that are going to be impacting the development and the track of this storm. Taking a look at the current aircraft observations from the recon data that we just got, you can see that we did find some fairly high winds, especially on the western end of the storm. We got up to winds near, I would say, 63, 64 knots, which is basically what we had going in there. So we already have the storm plotted at 65 knots, so we really didn't gain too much new information from this storm. We did find out that there's a little bit more wind shear than we thought before in this storm, so that's definitely good news. It should help break apart the system a little bit more. If we take a look at all the wind observations plotted out on the maps, you can see that on the western end of the storm, even though on the satellite imagery you can see that most of the cloud cover is on the eastern end and most of the thunderstorm activity is on the eastern end, if you look at where the center is, again, the center is right in here, that's where you're going to have the strongest winds. So the strongest winds, believe it or not, were on the western end of this, and if you just looked at the satellite imagery, you would definitely not expect that. And we were dealing with winds that are getting up, again, above 64 knots, so that would be already above that hurricane status. So we have already achieved hurricane status on multiple different passes through the storm. We're gonna have to see whether this can strengthen a little bit more before it eventually makes impact with the southern tip of Haiti, which is right up there. And the southern tip of Haiti is also very mountainous, so they have a lot of high terrain that can also break apart this storm. So that's definitely one of the good aspects of this storm. We have many different obstacles in its way that could help break it apart. That is going to wrap it up for today's video. Please consider liking the video, subscribing, and turning on notifications. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.